Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Webinar Talk Show. My name is Tom Singer.
And I'm Liz Green. And one of the things that has occupied a lot of my time this last couple of weeks, and I bet it's occupied your time too, Tom, is talking with people who are thinking that their in-person event isn't going to happen and they're going to have to move to a virtual environment. It's happening to a lot of us right now. And I was speaking to a group who needs to move all of their continuing education programs online, and they're really worried about what are they going to do? How is this going to be quality education when it's in an environment where they're not really comfortable?
Right, and we have talked about this ever since we've moved to this virtual world, and my God, back in March, we all moved really fast. I mean, if you think about it, from associations and companies who have conferences, to businesses who have employee meetings, to school-age kids and college kids who everything had to move online. We've been saying since the beginning that it has to be about the experience, and that's why we created the Webinar Talk Show, because Liz and I believe wholeheartedly that webinars and other types of online events really should be and can be better than talking heads over PowerPoint. So today we're going to jump into a little bit about instructional design and how do you actually create learning that's going to work.
Right.
And
we have a great guest.
We do have a great guest. I am really excited to share with all of you Dr. Amy Climer. Now, Amy, she works with teams to help them be and have more innovation, how to be more innovative in the work that they do. And she has a really interesting background. Her master's degree is in outdoor education, which really, if you think about it, translates to experiential education. And then her master's degree is in leadership and change with a focus on creativity and teams. And that's what I think everybody needs to talk about today as we move to this virtual world. So Dr. Amy Climer, welcome to the Webinar Talk Show.
Yay. Hi, thanks for having me.
There are so many things that I want to talk about with you, but I had the experience of actually participating in one of your programs. You came to Wisconsin to our National Speakers Association chapter here in Wisconsin. Also, Amy is a fellow Badger, so we just have to get that in there.
Oh, you didn't tell me that there was another Wisconsin grad on the call.
Well, I'm not a grad. I used to work there. I used to work at UW.
Okay. Well,
but we will claim you as a Badger.
I'm happy to be a Badger.
But you came, and honestly, I didn't know what to expect from your session, but I came with an open mind, also because I know you and I wanted to hang out with you. But you started the program in a really interesting way, using a tool, a deck of cards that you've developed that actually made me engage in what you were teaching in a different way. And it was so simple, but enormously effective. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are, how you use them, and then how does that relate to this virtual environment that we're in now?
Sure. Yeah. So the deck of cards that you're talking about that I used with you all, they're called Climer cards. I'll just hold them up. So it's this deck of cards that I created probably actually, I think 2012. And I'm actually working on a virtual version. So I think what I'll do is I'll show you the virtual version because, well, that's what we're talking about. It makes more sense. And it'll just be easier to explain it. So you can see on the screen, there's all these images, and these happen to be little watercolor paintings that I did a number of years ago. And the images I specifically...
Wow, and an artist too, look at that.
They're really beautiful.
They are nice.
Thanks, yeah, they're just, it was kind of funny. I just was, these doodles sort of evolved into this. So, but anyway, the images I specifically chose images that could spark ideas and metaphors and might have multiple meanings. And so the way I use them is if I'm in person, I would spread them all out on the table, or if I'm virtual, I would, I'm having a virtual version of this created, and it should be done in just a couple of weeks, like early September, so I'm super excited. But this is the prototype you're seeing right now. So I like to start off with getting people engaged with the content, but in a way that will help them also connect with each other. So they're connecting with each other, they're connecting with the content. So, gosh, I'm trying to remember exactly what I did with you all at NSA, but let's say we were having a workshop on how to be more experiential virtually, kind of like we are here. So I might ask someone to pick a card that represents your experience with virtual learning. And then people can just pick any card. So Eliz or Tom, one of you throw out, what card would you pick?
I like the one of the camping tent because my goal is to hike the Appalachian Trail in 5 years with my now college-age daughter.
Okay, now what does that have to do with the question? Pick a card that represents this idea of, pick a card that represents something that you've struggled with regarding virtual learning.
So I'm still going to pick the tent.
Okay.
Because setting up a tent is hard. And that sort of reminds me of what I've struggled with in both as a learner and as a teacher.
Awesome.
It's hard to put the pieces together.
Great metaphor. Yeah. So then what happens is then Tom can type in his response. He can see what others submitted. And actually there's a couple other people on here from previous session that are still in there. And then Liz could do the same thing. And everybody does this simultaneously if you're doing the virtual version. And then the nice thing is you can have people pair up and have a conversation. If you're virtual, you can send them into a breakout room, or you can have that conversation as a full group if you're a small group of people. And then it just gets people talking and thinking in a different way about the content. One of the things, I had this really interesting moment several years ago where I was at a ATD, the Association of Training and Development conference. And this woman came up to me, I didn't know her. And she's like, oh, Amy, I've been using your cards. I have to talk to you. I love them so much because every time I use them, somebody cries. I was like, what? Is this a good thing? She's like, no, because and apparently the topics that she was trying to, that she was working on with clients were quite personal and quite deep. And she said, people they say things that they wouldn't have said otherwise. They get more real, they get more sincere. And I've seen that in so many different ways. But I think the ultimate point here is whether you're using this tool or another tool is to think about how can you begin to engage people with the content right away.
And for me, when you used it with us, I didn't know what I came there looking for. But because I picked up the sewing machine and had a comment about I'm very good at constructing things, but I need a pattern.
I love it.
Then, right? Because I'm like, I just need the pattern. So now I enter into our conversation that we had that day, looking for the pattern to take back and construct my own thing. Which is exactly what I found. But had you not made me make that intention at the beginning, I'm pretty sure I would have a notebook full of notes because you were brilliant, but I wouldn't have internalized it in a way that now made me go back and do something different.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is like setting up a way that participants they can internalize what they're learning, they can help make it relevant for them, especially with adults. If it's not relevant, I mean, I'm checked out, right? I don't care.
I don't even know if it's adults. I mean, with all this learning that's going on with like high school aged and middle school kids, I would imagine there's not a group that will check out faster if the teacher isn't engaging. So let's talk a little bit about, because you're an expert in instructional design, for parents at home or teachers, what do people need to be aware of in this virtual learning environment?
I think there's a few things. So in the last several months, obviously, like everyone, I've been doing a lot of virtual work. And I have identified these 3 elements that people need to think about. So the first is technology. Get out your helpfully
get my notepad here.
Yeah, there you go. Liz, if you want to draw them out, you can think of them as a 3-part Venn diagram.
I'm on it.
Technology, design, and delivery. And the technology is like, you got to know and use the technology. I mean, that sounds so basic, but I can't tell you how many times I have been a guest, a speaker or trainer with a group of people who I thought, oh, for sure, they're pros at Zoom. And it turns out They don't know how to set up a poll. They don't know how to set up a breakout room. They don't, and I'm always a little bit surprised, and this is me needing to check my assumptions, I suppose. But just if you know all those features about whatever platform you're using, it doesn't really matter what platform, it fades away into the background. And so it's kind of like when you first are learning to ride a bike, like you cannot have a conversation with your parent. All you can do is focus. And then eventually, you get so good enough, you're just like chatting away and you're having this great conversation with whoever you're riding with, and you're not thinking about the bike anymore.
Right.
And that's where you want to get with the technology. So that, and the reality is, like, in an hour, you could go on any of the technology websites, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and you can be an expert in an hour. So it's not difficult. But you got to embrace it a bit and kind of have a good attitude about it. So anyway, technology, the next thing is design, and just thinking about actually being intentional about the design. And then the last part is thinking about how you deliver. And we can get into more depth into those areas if you want. But those are the three things you want to think about.
Yeah, I would like us to look at the last two a little closer. Obviously, the tech is what the tech is, and you're just going to have to suck it up and pull up your pants and actually wear pants and learn the technology.
Actually, you don't have to wear pants.
Oh, that's true.
I am wearing them, but just for the record.
let's talk really quickly about design and delivery in online learning.
Okay. So I think that one of the biggest questions I get is, I did this in person, whatever this is. How do I do this virtually? And 9 times out of 10, when I start asking questions of the client, I have conversations with them, they think, first of all, they think that they have to change everything and redo it because we're virtual. The reality is, a lot of times they can just keep doing the same thing. They just need to make some edits. So, a really simple example is like, the small table conversation becomes a breakout room. Maybe there was an activity that people were doing together that was somewhat physical, like they were building something together. Well, maybe there's some software that they can do that in. Or you can send them some items to build something at their desk. A number of my clients have started sending out small packages or special things that people open up during a training, which also gives a heightened sense of anticipation, which is a great learning tool. The other thing to think about with design, definitely virtual, and this is actually a good idea in person too, is that about every 10 minutes you want to switch it up. So sometimes you just need to deliver information and kind of do a little bit of a lecture. That's cool. 10 minutes, limit it to 10 minutes. And actually, and I wish I knew the reference for this, but I heard this research where we can only remember about 10 minutes of content at a time. And so if you imagine a typical 60-minute lecture in a classroom, that means if I'm lecturing for an hour, my students are only going to remember 10 minutes, but I don't get to choose which 10 minutes they remember. So it might end up being like, oh, seriously? That was the least important part.
So
or they remember the story you told, but not the actual point
not why
the story was supposed to make.
Yeah, I actually find that kind of hits close to home. One of the things I started doing in the live event before COVID, when I would MC events, is I would try to convince the meeting planner and the speaker to have the speaker go shorter and then let me interview them live on stage so that we could have that shakeup. And when they would do it, everybody, audience, speaker, and meeting planner agreed it was great. A lot of speakers wouldn't do it. They wanted to talk for the whole hour. And that's really what has led Eliz and I to starting this whole concept of, the interview format of emceeing conferences. We want to make sure they're keeping it short and shaking it up. And I don't know that I thought that we were doing that by design. I now feel real smart.
Well,
awesome,
it is design. I was speaking, as I said, with an association yesterday, that they are taking all of their continuing education that they would deliver at their conference in person and now delivering it virtually. And we did have the conversation about working with the speakers to make that presentation part much more concise and then have some sort of interaction in between. But it does make me think, one of the formats that Tom and I talk about is that chunk Q&A, chunk Q&A, chunk Q&A, which does give people a reason to participate in real time rather than watching it passively later recorded, which some people have to do anyway. But if
Right.
you're participating in real time and you have a question that then the MC can can ask, or it shows up in the Q&A or the chat, it's immediate clarification, which
Yeah.
you don't get necessarily if you're sitting in a breakout room of 100 people. You're not like, excuse me.
Right, right. Unless you're just like one of those super bold extroverts, most people are, if anything, like leaning over like, what the heck is she talking about?
Right, right. But if there's that chatter in the chat, like, what? I don't
Yeah.
understand what she's talking about. You can actually address that in real time. And I think sometimes, I wonder what you think, that virtual education can be better in ways than in person.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I've actually been using this hashtag lately, hashtag virtual can be awesome. And,
I like
and I,
that.
and I think that your example about the chat is a perfect reason, in that a couple things could happen. One, someone could say, wait, what? I missed what she just said. And then somebody else can put it in there. Or like, what
Right.
was that book that she mentioned? And
Yep.
I've seen this happen all the time, right?
And
Someone else
people
puts a
drop the
link.
links in and all that. They
It's
share
awesome.
their part of it.
Yeah, and so then like, hey, they're doing some work for me. That's awesome, right?
Right.
Or they can throw a question in that I can answer right there in the moment that, say a live keynote with 300 people sitting in an audience, like no one's going to interrupt and ask a question,
Right.
even if you encourage them to. So I love the chat for that. And I think I've been in a couple situations where I've been a keynote speaker or doing some sort of training where the organizer like banned the chat and said, don't use the chat. And I was like, what? No, this is a great goal.
I've seen that with a bunch of clients, and they're like, oh, it gets out of hand and people don't pay attention. I said, no, if you take away the chat, people leave and go to the refrigerator.
Yeah,
Right.
And then just turning off their video. Then I did a training earlier this week, a keynote with us. It was like the beginning of a week-long training for this university. And the organizer told everyone to turn their video off. And I didn't know that. And so I get on, I'm like, hey, everyone, turn on your video. I'd love to see your beautiful face. And then people were like, what?
What do I do?
It's like, do I listen to my boss or the guest, And
Yeah.
I don't, and she, and obviously, well-intentioned, she wanted them to turn their video off because she thought it would be distracting. And I thought, well, now you're just, in fact, one person did turn their video on and she was like making breakfast at the stove. And I mean, kudos to her for turning on her video, actually.
So let's touch on that third point of delivery, because one of the things I've found is that every speaker I've talked to has their own belief of what's the right answer to how to deliver virtually. And yet I've found it really doesn't necessarily matter if someone is standing and has like a green screen and a whole thing and they're running around and being this, or if they're just sitting in a spot and having sort of an emotional connection through that camera with people, or anything in between, as long as it's true to them. So what do you think about delivery in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just first of all, the idea of like there's a right way to do it, just immediately like my hackles go up because I'm not very big on like one right answer. So my thought as you were talking was like if you needed a right way, it would be to be yourself. And and it depends. Like there are times where it's completely appropriate to be really loud and big and energetic, and then there are other times where that would be really inappropriate, depending on the content and the context of what you're doing. So I think, you got to sort of figure that out for yourself. A few tips though, that I have found helpful in sharing with other people, and they've kind of come back to me and said, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And one of those is to stand up. So, there are very few situations where I would present live in person and I would be sitting down. Now there are some cases and that would make sense. Like if I'm with a small group and it's more of an intimate conversation, but for me, it doesn't make sense to go on a stage with 300 people and stand up. I mean, to sit down, excuse me. So therefore I'm going to do the same thing virtually. And it completely changes our energy. I mean, like our lungs open up and like my energy is completely affected by standing up. And, I'm telling people like, put your laptop on a cardboard box. It doesn't matter. Figure that out. And So that's one thing. The other thing that, and I'm sure, I mean, you both know this, is just like look into the camera and put the camera at eye level, right? Especially for, I know there are probably some classroom teachers looking at or, watching this. So just as an example, if I'm, let me see if I can do this well. If I have my laptop camera, I'm now like peering down and it's like I'm, hovering over everybody. You can look up my nose, which is awkward, right? So we're gonna not stay there too long, but just that simple change can make a huge difference. And then the third thing I'll just say, so camera, microphone, or look in the camera, stand up. And then the third thing is practice, what you're going to say. And that often, I think that's probably a big difference between professional speakers and trainers and those who are newer or just not thinking in that way. I mean, you could be a 30-year veteran, but still not be at that professional level.
Right.
And the first time I really understood how valuable this was when a decade or so ago, I was leading a lot of team building programs, and actually mostly in Madison, Wisconsin. And as I would drive to them, I often had, 30 to 60-minute drive. I would practice out loud in the car directions that I was going to give to the different activities that I was going to lead. If I practiced the directions, people almost never had questions about what I meant. But if I didn't practice the directions, they would be like, wait, what do we do again? And which was all on me not being clear about the directions. And just that saying it out loud, like practicing what you're going to say, can be super valuable.
Yeah. And in fact, I read a study that said that they looked at the TED and TEDx talks that went viral, that did really well. And they stripped out celebrities from the study. So just regular people, professors or whoever who did talks. The ones that went viral, the person put in 40 to 60 hours of preparation because they knew that was an important stage. So they gave it the time. And I've always thought that was really important because most people aren't putting in 2 hours of preparation for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think I just finished writing a book, and one of the things that was particularly challenging is taking the exercises that I've done in a room with people, with me present, handing out materials and doing that sort of thing, and then having to write it down on paper in a way that would actually make sense and wouldn't have people coming back and saying, on page 37, when you say like, what? I don't understand. That process actually made me much better in the room because I had thought through in a very strategic way how to describe this. So that work really paid off, both hopefully in the book, but also in my presentation. So I completely agree, particularly when you're asking people to do things.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great example.
So Amy, as we sort of get around to wrapping this up, we've still got some time, but I really would like to focus in on companies and associations who 5 months ago had no idea how to do any of this. Right. I mean, the advice that we started with of technology and design and the presentation, the delivery, that's important. But if you were talking to, the head of an association or the head of a company who's responsible for a meeting, where would you take them to be ready, to be good, to be awesome?
I mean, this seems so cliche, but I think the first thing is like, what are you trying to get out of it? What are your goals? What's the purpose of this? Sometimes it is strictly we just need to deliver some information. And that's going to really change versus like, oh, we need people to immediately apply this. We need some deep learning. We want conversation. And so I think that you have to start there. It's like, what are your goals? What are your purpose? What is your purpose? And then I think if you are trying to be experiential, interactive, and you really want that deep engagement, then it's to look at, okay, how do you do that well? And I have this class that I teach called Leading Engaging Virtual Meetings. And we have these live sessions where people just can come and ask questions. And a question that I've gotten many times is something like, hey, I heard that you should only do 10-minute breakout rooms. Can you talk a little about that? Like, is that true? I was like, what? 10 minutes? Like, where did that come from? And so I think one of the things that's happening is that these random rules are getting thrown around that make no sense. And the person who was asking me said, I typically do these like these full day trainings, and people go off with a partner for an hour and they're having these really deep conversations, but I'm only supposed to do 10-minute breakout rooms. I was like, what? No, that in your context, you need to do an hour-long breakout room. That's totally fine. And so I think it's to like, just really think about, are you using some random rule out of context that makes no sense in your situation? And don't be afraid to sort of break the rules and to experiment and try new things. And I think people are ready for that. Like, everybody knows how to use the platforms at this point, at least good enough, well enough. And so now it's like, all right, let's go further. Let's push this a bit, because I think there is incredible potential here. I
agree. And one of the things that Tom and I keep saying is, don't cancel your event.
Yes,
because people really need events right now. They need the connection, they need the information, they just need to gather, even in this virtual environment. So I really think that what you just said is so important. But I also think, going back to what you were talking about, that design is so, when you start with what do you want to have happen, that design of how that's going to work within this virtual environment is so important. Do you perhaps have some resources on that?
I do, actually.
Really? I'm so surprised.
So 2 resources I'll share. The first is I have a class called Leading Engaging Virtual Meetings. And it's really, meetings isn't the right word necessarily, because it's meetings, trainings, webinars. Like, if you are working in this virtual space and you're doing any delivery or any facilitation, then this class is helpful. The next cohort is actually open up right now. What are we, late August? So the next live sessions start in September. So the September cohort is open now. And you could go to my website, which is climerconsulting.com, which is CLIMER.
Yep.
No B. Yeah, no B in my last name.
No B.
Yeah. So go to climerconsulting.com. That's there. And it's actually a really robust course. There's probably 50 modules, about 45 videos that all just came about because people kept asking me questions in March when COVID hit. And I was getting all these questions like, Amy, how do I do this well? Like, I know how to use Zoom, but what do I, how do I make this webinar engaging? And at first it's like, oh yeah, let me help you. And then I was like, wait, too many people. So I created this course, and I've got some really, really awesome feedback. So check that out. The other resource is the Climer cards that I shared with you earlier. I'll throw them back up on the screen. So this is just a prototype. The real thing is being made. It should be out any day now, but we're hoping for the first week of September. So just a couple more weeks. And if you want to be on the list to get notification about that, you can go to climercards.com and sign up there to get info.
And are the Climer cards something that like professional trainers and speakers can license from you to be able to use in their trainings? What is the purpose of the Climer cards?
Yeah, they can absolutely. So the purpose is to help your trainings be more experiential, be more engaging, interactive. Yeah, so basically the way this works is once the software is up, you sign up, you get a subscription for, you could do a month or a year, whatever you want. One of the cool things that will be nice for other professional speakers or trainers is you can actually also upload your own decks of cards. So if you've created a deck, and you need to have copyright permission to do that, but if you've created your own deck and you want to upload your own deck and use them virtually, the platform will support that.
Nice. I actually think I just want to license yours, because I see a way that I could use them in what I teach that would actually be very different than the way you teach it, because they are so open-ended. When I was looking at it, I thought, I wonder what it costs to license her software or her cards.
No, that's all included. When you sign up for the software, there is a fee, but that allows you to use them with any group.
Awesome.
And so you could use them. Oh, go ahead.
I'll be your first customer. I already have an idea of how to use it in my on my own.
Oh, well, I'd love to hear about it afterwards, and maybe I could share it with other people as well. There are dozens and dozens of ways to use them, and I love hearing people's creativity around them. So
this has been amazing.
Yes.
I know people are going to have more questions. Tell us your website again so people know where to find you.
Sure. It's climerconsulting.com. My name's there on the screen, but it's CLIMER consulting.com. or you can go to climercards.com. Either way, it gets to me.
Perfect. You
Nice.
can
Well,
find
thank
Tom
you.
and I at webinartalkshow.com and on, of course, our Facebook group, Webinar Talk Show.
And thank you so much for joining us. This is the perfect example of what Eliz and I have been saying all along. And that is when you can have an in-depth and thoughtful conversation, there's so much learning that comes along that you don't just have to have some expert blathering on over a PowerPoint.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for inviting me and for asking great questions. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. We'll see everybody next week. We've got more shows coming on the Webinar Talk Show. So be sure to tell your friends and sign up. Follow us on Facebook and at thewebinartalkshow.com.
Have a great day.
Bye.